75 million baby boomers are about to turn 80, and they all want to stay in their own homes. The problem? There aren't enough businesses built to support that. Dave Pazgan saw that gap early and built the nation's first mobility franchise around it. And now he's doing it again because the timing has never been better. This is Dave Pazgan on The Exit Plan. Welcome back to another episode of How I Franchise This. Today we are joined by Dave Pazgan, the founder and CEO of Liftology, and we're going to get into his whole backstory here in a second. But Dave, why don't you kick it off from the beginning? You went from the mortgage industry to co-founding the nation's first mobility franchise, and now you're building a second one. How did you get into this? What made you look at stair lifts and wheelchair ramps and think, this is the industry I'm betting my career on?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, to your point, I had my first kind of career arc after college was in the mortgage banking industry, and I did about 12 years in that industry and ended up running a company that was a national mortgage lender until 2007. That ended badly. So it was, kind of like if you've seen the movie The Big Short. We were kind of caught up in all of that stuff. So we were a pretty good sized company that we were publicly traded and had about 4,000 employees. And so it was a bit of an interesting time throughout 2007 as I was exiting the mortgage industry. And the way that the first franchise brand that I built came about was that I had a couple of guys that I worked with at my mortgage company. They both happened to live in the same town in North Carolina, in Wilmington. After that mortgage company went away, they got involved in the mobility business. The reason was that one of those two gentlemen, his father, was doing installations in another part of North Carolina, installing mobility equipment for a local dealer there that happened to be a good friend of his. And so he kind of turned him on to it. So my partner Keith heard from his dad, like, hey, I've got this job. I'm doing installations for a friend of mine. He's doing really well installing, lifts and ramps, and you should look into the business. And so they did. And so the two guys that became my partners at 101 Mobility both started up in Wilmington and they called it something else when they first started it. So they got into the business and started operating and just out of a single location in North Carolina. And about 4 or 5 months of doing that, they reached out and said, hey, we've got this little business. It's doing really well, off to a great start. And their big observation was that the market seems really fragmented. Like there was lots of little companies in every corner of the US doing what they did, but nobody had a national brand or a national footprint. So their big idea was this industry could use like a national brand. And they reached out to me to help them join them as partners and help figure out how to go about doing that. So in 2008, I joined up with them. And again, at that time, the three of us knew really very little about that industry in general, which probably, sometimes works in your favor, right? If you don't know what you don't know, then sometimes you're not making assumptions, just kind of come open-eyed and open-minded to the industry. And so after about a year of running that business locally, we started thinking about franchising it. Actually kind of a fun story. So my one partner, Keith, in one of our meetings at some point said, hey, I was thinking over the weekend, this business would make a great franchise. And my response to that at the time was, oh, that would never work. And so we kind of tabled it. And then
Why did you say that? Why do you think you said that initially?
I don't know. I just didn't know that much about franchising. And it was just like he made a comment and I kind of like dismissed it out of hand without really thinking about it. And the funnier part of the story is I had completely forgotten about that conversation. And so I come in the office one day, like a couple months later, and I'm like, guys, I have a great idea. We should franchise this. And they're like, are you kidding me? I gave you that idea like 2 months ago. You said it would never work. And I said, well, it was a bad idea then. It's a great idea now. So,
What
anyways,
what changed your mind? Did you learn something in those 2 months or see
I don't
something
know.
or
That was 15 years ago. So I'm trying to remember, like, it was really just like, I actually had a little bit of exposure to franchising way back when I was in college for 2 summers. I was a college pro painting franchisee
Yep.
in Cleveland, Ohio. So I did that for 2 summers. And so I had like some experience in franchising as a franchisee, brief that it was, and it was a long time before that, but so I had a little bit of exposure to it. But anyway, so we ended up hiring Mark Siebert and Dave Hood from the iFranchise Group, and they helped us put together all of our necessary elements to start offering franchises, and it worked. Like a fun story I like to tell candidates today is that we started franchising that brand in 2010, and all of the franchises we awarded that very first year in 2010 are still there 15 16 years later.
Wow.
So that's kind of
Wow.
rare just in franchise. There were three, it wasn't that many, but there they're all still
Still.
there. So, and that's kind of been the story for that brand over the years, is that the overall success rate's been really high, very little turnover. The vast majority of franchises that we awarded over the years while I was there are still there. So, and doing well mostly.
That is incredibly rare, especially early on when you said it earlier. It's like you don't know a lot about franchising out of the gate. A lot of this is figuring it out as you go. And franchising or not, any business, there's not a fully written guidebook. And a lot of the entrepreneur's journey is problem solving and navigating and adapting and figuring things
Yeah.
out on the fly. And then you add franchising as an element, and so it's I think pretty uncommon to have that level of franchisee success that's that tenured and that long. What do you
Yeah.
think you would attribute that to? Was it you guys got the right operators, early on and got right timing and some luck there? Or was it, hey, we were very diligent about the model and the playbook and the resources we provide?
Yeah.
What do
I
you think
mean,
it was?
I would start with the fact that it's fundamentally a good business. Like, it's a good industry. There's robust demand for what we're doing. And I think also the industry was then and still today is very fragmented. So it's dominated by probably at least a couple thousand small dealerships around the country that do what we do. And so, because it's so fragmented, there's just the customer experiences can really vary widely. And so we dug in on operational competence and the customer experience. And so I think that was a factor. But I think at the end of the day, like, the industry is just a good industry. Like, in franchising, you read a lot of articles and you hear a lot of people give advice around, what kind of trends to chase in franchising. And some of them are seemingly like they don't have great legs. There's, I don't know, like all kinds of different things that you could get into that are just niche businesses that, might be hot right now, but how long is that going to last? So this is one of those industries that's been around for a really long time. The products that we sell and install have been being made for 50 years or longer. And, the demographic and the folks that need the equipment that we provide is growing. There's a lot of tailwind to our industry, and that's been true for a while. It's accelerating right now because of the silver tsunami, aging baby boomers turning 80 starting this year. But so that's accelerating that growth curve. But I would say fundamentally, it's just been a good business and a good industry to be involved in because there's robust demand. It's not a discretionary buy. And then the manufacturing partners that we have really gotten good at refining their products over the years so that they're really reliable, easy to install. They have done a nice job of making it relatively easy to be a dealer of these products in this industry. And then they also provide good support. So I think that's part of it. I think the other piece of it was we chose to really focus on that customer experience part. I get a lot of candidates that ask me today, like, how do you compete? Like, what's Liftology's competitive advantage? And I always think like there's really three places where you can plant your flag to build an advantage. One of them would be to have a differentiated product. We have something different that nobody else has. That's not true for us. We're a dealer of other people's products, and there's lots of other dealers that sell what we sell or something very similar. So we don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could be a price leader. You can say, well, buy from us because we're going to be the low cost provider. That's not us either. Like, our industry doesn't really work that way. It would have never made sense to try to be a low cost provider anyhow, but it's also just not our style. We want to be fair and, all of that. Like, our prices are very much at market and fair prices, but we don't tell people to buy from us because we're going to be the least expensive option. So then what's left? Like, what do you choose to focus on? It's all about that customer experience. And so we focus on like very fundamental things like answering the phone. So we, for example, at Liftology have created what we call our AAA proven process. And the first A in the AAA proven process stands for answer the damn phone. And we have it's written that way in the ops manual because it's sort of like, it's a little bit of like a North Star, right? Like, it's functionally correct, but it's also kind of a signal about how we're going to treat our customers. And just answering the phone puts us in an advantage over a lot of our competition. So that was true at my last brand, 101 Mobility. It's still true today at Liftology. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. Just robust industry. We did a lot of things right. And then, of course, to your point, I think we did kind of get lucky because we were new to the game of franchising, but we brought on some really strong, competent, entrepreneurially minded owners in that first 20 or 30 that we brought into 101 Mobility. Got to give up a little bit of luck to that because we didn't really know what we were doing. So
Yeah.
so that worked out well.
And when you were showing those first, that first, cohort of franchisees and operators, what is it that you're actually showing them? Did you have, one corporate location at that point, 3, 5, 10?
Yeah.
If you can take yourself back to that time, were those locations doing really well, millions of dollars per territory, or what I guess were you showing at the time that got
It
people
was super
excited?
early. Yeah, we had basically the one location in Wilmington, and I think if I remember right, we had started operating another location in Fayetteville, North Carolina, or something like that. There was a big
Okay.
VA hospital there, so that was part of our calculus with that. And we do a lot of business, or have historically done a lot of business with the VA network. But yeah, it was still pretty early, right? We had started in '08. We franchised it in 2010. So we didn't have years of experience. We had a pretty thin, we may not have even had an item 19 at the time, or a very limited one, because we just didn't have that much to show. So honestly, like the first handful of people that became franchise owners there, it's a big leap of faith. I think they definitely saw the industry kind of macro level opportunity and liked that part of it, that industry opportunity. And then I think, like a lot of things in franchising and sales in general, they came in and met with us and they trusted us. We felt like we knew what we were talking about, and we were being honest with them about what we knew and what we didn't know, and kind of where we were as a company and all of that. And I think that ended up working out pretty well. So it was honestly a bit thin in terms of what we had to show, and our earliest franchises definitely grew along with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said early on, when there's not a ton of financials to look at or multiple locations. I mean, you got to really bet on the people and each other,
Yeah.
and have that trust and conviction. What do you think? I mean, especially again early on, some things are going to go wrong. What do you think that first iteration got wrong that you guys had to fix before you really started to scale?
That's a great question. I think the thing that has always been, well, here's how I'll think about it. In our business, like many businesses, there are kind of two leverage points of where you've either succeed or fail. One of them is operational competence, like at the unit level, how hard is it to operate this business? In our world, that is like mostly installing stuff, right? So installations, how complex is the installation piece? Is it hard to figure out, hard to get good at, all of that? And then the other leverage point is, how do I get money in the door? How do I get revenue? How do I get customers? How do I make sales? And so in all of my time in the industry, I never had a franchise that really struggled because they had the phone was ringing off the hook, but they couldn't figure out how to install stuff. Like that has never really been a big issue. So almost always, like, the pressure came around sales, lead generation, and business development, because the operational part is fairly straightforward and not that complicated. So, and we also have good support from our suppliers, and they're good at training and support and all that. So that part kind of has largely taken care of itself. I would say what I saw happen quite a bit was that, like a lot of companies at the time, being in the 2010 timeframe, trying to figure out how to drive leads and so forth to our franchises through building better websites or better pay-per-click campaigns, or all of that was always a factor. And that part of our industry, like for most people, has kind of been, hit or miss. Like you get really good for a while. Like there was a period of time where for the key products that we were offering, we were the number one national search result, like for a while. And we got a lot of leads from it, which was great. But then, everybody else is playing catch up. They're trying to beat you. They're doing their own thing. And, you jump tracks from one digital marketing provider to another, and they have a different philosophy. And, that's always a very dynamic environment. Like things are changing all the time. So that's part of it. The one thing that I would say that I wish we had focused on more early at my last company, was around developing B2B relationships.
Mm,
There's meaningful opportunity in this industry to get most of your business from referral. And these would be from like hospitals and rehab centers and area agencies on aging and third-party administrators who are managing work comp claims and all of that. There's a whole universe of opportunity out there that is completely outside of just running ads on Google and waiting for the phone to ring.
yeah.
And the most successful people in this industry who've gotten really good over time and built pretty scaled up businesses, at this point they rely very little for internet leads for their business. They still get them and they still sell those jobs, but they're mostly not relying on it. Like most of their business now comes from referral. And so And that, I think, just sort of happened naturally. Like you had those that were good at it and they did more of it, and they over the years built that up to something meaningful. And that was probably one of the biggest ways to differentiate between the folks at the top 20% and the middle 60. The middle 60 tended to mostly wait for the phone to ring, and the top 20 were out building these relationships. And so
Yeah.
now that we know that, we have a whole system and program and playbook around how to accelerate that part of the development cycle, new franchises at Liftology. That's a big
Yeah, and it scales regionally, nationally, and to your point, once you have those relationships built, I mean, it
yeah.
feeds the whole system, and it's lower touch. I mean, it's a lot of work up front, but once you get it
Yeah.
going, it really starts the flywheel. I mean, I think
There's one
that.
other, just to
Oh, go ahead.
finish up, there's one other thing too that stands out is that a lot of our average kind of mom and pop competitors are relatively unsophisticated. So that's why things like answering the phone and having high engagement with customers can matter, because many of our competitors are just not good at that part. And even the bigger ones, the bigger franchised and other organizations out there, they still leave a lot on the table because nobody's really running a functional CRM. So they have
Mm,
systems to run, mostly operational workflows. But we built a system called Blueprint, which is our operating system that it's a custom operating system that our franchises use every day. And the signature piece of Blueprint is that it's a CRM, and we automatically capture all inbound information into the business. So whether it's somebody calls on the phone, or they fill out a form on your website, or we get a lead from a supplier, whatever that is, all of that data goes into the CRM top of funnel. And it gives us the opportunity to use that information and manage it, because not everyone who calls today is ready to do something today. A lot of them are, and sometimes the need's even urgent, but that's not always the case. And so when you do get that call, someone's maybe worried about their mom and they're starting to educate themselves and they have questions, but they're not ready to make an appointment or kind of take the next step today. For most of our competitors, when that call hangs up, that information just gets lost. And so we're trying to capture it all and put us in a position to be able to use that information to stay in touch and set up, marketing automations and drip campaigns and all of those types of things. So that's another kind of big thing that we're doing now that I think will pay dividends in the long run.
yeah, I'm glad you doubled down or double clicked on that, because I think at first when you hear, "Oh, answer the phones," what do you mean? It should be, of course, but think about any services business or local business or small business you've interacted with recently, whether it was lawn care or gutter or a general contractor. It's just a lot of these operators, to your point, aren't overly sophisticated. They don't have the tools to provide that top level customer support where they're attentive, they're immediately responding, it's urgent. It's when you have the problem, they're there immediately to solve it. It doesn't exist in so many different categories. And so while it might sound simple and it might sound obvious, doing that at scale and doing that as quickly as you guys are doing and as prepared as you guys are doing is not easy to pull off. And when you can pull it off, it makes a huge difference. You're getting jobs faster, you're giving the customer a better experience, especially during somewhat of a difficult time. You're having to change up your
Yeah.
home for access and mobility. So I think it's a huge differentiator.
Yeah, there are definitely some structural things that we try to put into place that give us the opportunity to be more responsive and ready to go for our customers. So CRM is part of that, but there's, more to it than that.
In that same vein, as a person looking in from the outside, what do you think people underestimate about the mobility space and just thinking that it might be a simple business? I mean, what are some of the complexities that I think people don't initially see at face value?
Yeah. So I would say that it's a little bit of phased approach that we take to the business, because there are what I would think of as like baseline simple products that all of our franchises will start to offer right out of the gate. And then as you gain experience, you can get into more complex aspects of the business. So, the bread and butter that we offer are residential grade stair lifts and ramps and platform lifts. That's like the majority of what we sell and install. But you can also get into doing commercial grade applications, same products that are just commercially rated. That typically requires more licensing and some other, permitting and other types of complexities. And then we also get into doing home elevators, which is another kind of step up, a more complex product line. The home elevator industry is changing a lot right now, primarily because of the product has changed. So it used to be like 25 years ago, if you wanted an elevator in your house, you had to think about it when you were building the house because you needed a shaftway and you needed usually a mechanical room to run the hydraulic systems and all of that. And so the new generation of elevators that's available are called through the floor or shaftless elevators. So they're independent
Hmm.
of they don't need a shaftway. You can put them almost in anywhere in a home. They just go between the two floors, and they're typically not hydraulic. They're more simpler drive systems. And so that has opened up an elevator, and they're also way less expensive just because you don't have to build a shaftway, and it's, hydraulic, non-hydraulic systems are just not as expensive. So that's opened up a lot of homes where, starting to consider an elevator actually makes a lot of sense. And so that's another area where, can get a little bit more complex as we move up the scale in terms of product complexity, but we don't have to necessarily start there. There's plenty of opportunity in, the kind of bread and butter lifts and ramps, but we do encourage our owners to be thinking about, like, get into the more complex products, as you gain experience and get your footing, let's start a plan to get you there. So
Well, so and I know we haven't talked about it a ton yet. So you built the nation's first mobility business and franchising or nationwide brand, and now you're back at it again with Liftology. I mean, what drew you back in? And then I want to talk about some of the things you look for on the day-to-day for a franchisee as an operator. But why what brought you back? I guess for the second run at
yeah,
it.
great question. So a couple of things. One, I just missed the business. Like when I was in it, I had a lot of fun with it, had and continue to have good relationships with the franchises there. Had great relationships with key suppliers. It's one of those businesses where, there's robust demand. And if you just get some fundamental things right, you can actually do pretty well. Like there's not any kind of really tricky aspect to being successful here. It's really blocking and tackling basic things like answering the phone, for example. So if you can, culturally and systematically structure yourself to be really good at that part, then you can be successful here. And I saw that happen at 101. And I think the same dynamic exists today. So I missed it was part of it. The silver tsunami was certainly part of the picture. There's a famous Wharton professor, Jeremy Siegel. He said it's a future that's already happened, right? Like we don't even have to predict it. It's already happening. And
Yeah.
because there's X number of people that are, born in these time frames, and over the next 20 years, they're all going to start turning 80. And so that is what it is, right? So there's that dynamic. So our industry is expecting to see pretty meaningful growth. And then I would say the third part, which I started to learn about as I got back into investigating the industry, is that it is changing a bit in that when we first started 101, it was essentially entirely fragmented, all mostly local, maybe a few regional, but no national players, maybe several thousand little companies that did what we do. There wasn't anybody that had a national brand, nobody franchising, nobody with a, roll up strategy or anything like that. And that over the last 10 years has changed. So you've got, 101 Mobility has about 85 locations. There's another company that started up after us called Next Day Access. They've got, another 80 plus locations. And then there's a few other participants that are, got some sort of national footprint, but there's still 2,000 or 3,000 little independent guys out there. That being said, I do think that as these more sophisticated operations continue to grow, they will gain market share over the unsophisticated operators. And it's because of systems around marketing and operations and support. Buying power is important. We had developed really good pricing structures with our key suppliers at 101 because we built for essentially our biggest supplier. 101 became their biggest customer. And so leveraged that experience into deep discounts for our Liftology franchises. And so these things all kind of in combination make it much more likely that a branded, franchised local operator is going to have more success than the independent who has a disadvantage around systems and pricing and operations and all of that. So that was kind of the dynamic that I saw. And then purely in the world of franchising, the two bigger franchise organizations were also running out of territory. And so I'm like, all right, well, there's, demand in the industry. People know the space now, especially people from your world, those that are helping franchise candidates evaluate franchising in general. That industry is a known thing now, and there's some demand for it. But, the two bigger incumbent players are mostly sold out, not territory left. So it felt like there was just all of those things kind of coming together at the same time. And then, I was available and I was kind of free of any non-competes or anything. I'm like, all right, now's the time to do it. So
Yep. Yeah, I agree. The market timing being one of the biggest things. I mean, you've talked about it a few times, but the silver tsunami is just the largest age group we've ever experienced that are going to need these services. And I've talked to a few people when we do industry research where you pretend to be a customer and you reach out to a few service providers, whether it's, mobility or again, gutter cleaning or roofing, and you see response times and you see wait lists and how long is it going to take. And this is one of those categories that if you do some of that market research in most markets, there's a wait list for jobs multiple weeks out, which is a good sign of there's more demand than there is supply. And whenever that's
yep.
the case, it's time to go compete and, open up another option. I love the timing. Let's talk about some of the day-to-day operations. I come on as a franchisee to Liftology. You're watching me my first month. What do you look for? Is Alex being a good
Yeah.
doing a good job talking to customers? Am I, hands-on tools and a good operator? What do you look for to determine if I'm going to be a good long-term franchise partner and business
Honestly,
owner?
it usually starts before anybody even opens. Like you can tell in the onboarding process, like how's that going, right? So we have a weekly check-in with every franchise that's going through onboarding, and actually our operations leader that does that every week produces a grade, like 5 out of 5 this week or 4 out of 5 or whatever, because we're trying to feel like, are these, newly minted franchise owners, how are they doing with the onboarding? Because it's a good signal about what's going to happen next, right? So if you're having to drag a candidate, or not a candidate, but a new owner now through all the little steps that need to happen in order to get their business open, that's typically not a good sign. So we start to watch that early, like how are they showing up to the meetings? Are they getting the things done? Are they acting proactive in their market to go get their training signed up and, get their space ready and all of those kinds of things. So it starts with that. I would say the next key thing in the first month or so is just getting that baseline level of comfort around selling the products, specifically selling them to the individual customers that use them. So, we'll start the B2B stuff and we'll get all of that going. But in the earliest short term, you will start to get some leads for people that need a stair lift or a ramp. And so how does that go at your first run at it? So are they following the fundamentals of success here, because we track all of this. So answering the phone when it rings, getting to customers quickly, are we doing all of those things so that when you do start to go out and you're presenting a product to a customer for the first time or second time or third time, that you feel pretty comfortable and that you can win those jobs. Like I would expect, if we're doing all the fundamentals right, that you're winning 8 out of 10 of your appointments. Like you should win most of them. This is not the type of product where people usually get 3 or 4 quotes and then make a decision. They almost always buy from the first person that comes out. And so if you're doing the fundamentals right, answering the phone, carrying a little bit of inventory, going out there right away, not putting them out for weeks to, make the appointment and so forth, then you should be winning most of that business. So it's like comfort level around those initial sales, those conversations, what's the close rate look like? And then the other, fundamentals that lead up to that, which are phone answer rates, responsiveness, turnaround times, how long before the appointment, happens, all of those kinds of things. So that's really what we're looking for. It's like get the fundamentals right coming out of the gate.
Yeah, sounds like fundamentals and having some urgency and again, a desire to knock things out. Like if a task pops up, you're gonna have 10 more tomorrow. Like let's get it done
Yeah.
today and keep things moving. Are there, on the flip side of that, do you see any, I guess, where do you see new owners waste time that has very little impact on the business or the revenue and the growth of the
Yeah.
business?
It's a great question. I actually used to say this a lot. Like I call it playing business, right? So they're doing things that are in the office for the business, but they're not needle moving activities. So I used to kind of tongue in cheek call it like pencil sharpening, right? All their pencils are sharp. How many orders are they writing? None, right? So their files are organized and their showroom is, spick and span, and the warehouse is all organized and there's not a, speck of dust on the floor. Well, that's great. But how much business are you getting by cleaning your warehouse? None. And so the mistake that I would see happen a lot, and it's mostly fear driven, is candidates will all say, yes, Dave, I know we need to go out and start this process of talking to the hospitals and the rehab centers and the orthopedic services and these other places that could be referral partnerships, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. Well, what are you doing exactly? Well, they're doing busy work because they can say that they're busy so that they don't have to go do what makes them uncomfortable, which is go out and pitch and present and talk to people. And so that's a big part of our criteria now. We talk a lot about that with candidates. Like, this is what we're looking for. Like, this is not a behind the desk kind of business. Like, you got to get out and go talk to people, and you got to go knock on doors. And listen, you're not like the pharmaceutical rep trying to get into a physician's office these days where they have all the signs up that say, if you're a rep, don't come in here. It's not like that. Like, they're pretty open to hearing from you and they want to talk to you. You have to do the work. And so that would be my biggest frustration. I had an owner one time at 101 many years ago, and I was just called him to check in with him. And he kind of bothered me because he was like, I'm like, well, how are things going? He goes, well, it's been pretty quiet around here. And I'm like, so what are you doing about it? Like, why are you telling me it's been quiet? Like, the quiet is because you're allowing it to be quiet. Like, when's the last time you got in your car and went out and talked to some people? And the answer was he hadn't. He was just waiting for the phone to ring, right? So that's be the biggest failure point to me, is if you're starting your new business and you have some expectation that now Dave and company at the home office are going to drive all the leads that you need to your business. We're going to drive some, but that's not enough to sustain your business. Like, you got to go get it.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception in business ownership in general, but franchising especially, is it's not mailbox money. At the end of the day, you're still an entrepreneur, you're still an owner
Right.
of a business, and if you have a problem, no one's coming to save you necessarily. The franchisor is there with maybe some life support they can call in on how to do a certain thing, but at the end of the day, like, you got to start swimming, you got to start moving, and you got to go figure things out. And so I like that example of, you still have to get out there and see people, talk to customers, work with your team. It's not just, oh, I invested 10K here and it's going to spit out 100K at the other end. There's a lot of
Right.
work that still has to go into this, no matter how you cut it. There's no
Yep.
shortcuts. Um, I want to talk about your customer base and some of the kind of emotional part of being a franchisee, serving the group that you do. It's a vulnerable population. It's aging seniors, it's veterans, it's people with disabilities. How do you train a new franchisee that's, having a conversation with a family whose parent or the individual themselves is, being told that it's not safe to live in their home the way that it is, structured anymore? And how do you train someone to have those types of tougher emotional conversations?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, honestly, is like getting the right fit in the door in the first place. I don't know if you can train empathy, in my opinion. Like, I think empathy is you either have it or you don't. And so we can train you on like the specifics of how to maybe navigate some of those conversations, but what it starts with are finding people that have the right amount of empathy for this business in the first place. It is, to your point, extremely rewarding industry. In fact, when my partners and I got back into it, what's one of the things we talked about a lot was how, we kind of miss that, like, especially if you're operating at one of the unit levels and building one of these businesses firsthand. I mean, you're making some fundamental changes to people's lives. Like, we put lits in for people who say, man, I'm going to go sleep in my bed tonight for the first time in 4 years. I've been sleeping on the couch because I was afraid to climb the stairs. You get a lot of those kinds of situations where people's lives are actually fundamentally changed for the better by the equipment that we provide. So
Mm.
I think that really matters a lot. And yeah, I don't know if I have any magic to teach people how to be empathetic. I think you just kind of have to
You got to
have it.
screen for it.
Yeah, you screen for it. We're huge on cultural fit. Like, one of the big things I learned in my journey in franchising is, like, especially for a brand like us, like, we'll never have 200 or anything. Like, we'll have 70 owners, probably 75 maybe, and that'll be it. So we're being very selective. The owners will typically own their whole market. So we got to get that right fit, and that empathy feature of the owner is part of the success formula. So we screen for that on the front end, and so hopefully we don't have to do a whole lot of training about how to be empathetic on the back end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think you have to. It's like interviewing in a lot of ways. You got to make sure that it's the right person for the job and the
Yeah.
the mission that you guys are on. I have to imagine, though, given how exciting this space is, it's growing, huge amount of pent-up demand and more coming. It probably attracts a lot of people that see the market, they see the dollar signs, they see the excitement, but you're also looking for people that have the empathy. I mean, can you tell when someone is actually in it for your guys' mission versus someone who sees good
Yeah.
timing, a good market, et cetera?
Yeah, we can. We generally can because we spend time with people. So, we have so far stuck to doing all like live meet the team events. Either people have come to our office in Salt Lake City or have actually gone and done a few road trips and met with good candidates because I just couldn't make the timing work. So I flew out and met with them in person. But we just believe that in-person time together is really important as part of that evaluation because people can say whatever they want to say on a 2 hour or 3 hour virtual discovery day or meet the team day, but people let their guard down. You take them to dinner, you hang out a little bit, you see them for breakfast, you spend a day, you hear the kind of questions they ask or don't ask, and you get a pretty good feel for people when you just spend time with them. So that's why
Yeah.
we are careful not to skip that part. It gets a little dicey, like spring break time frame, and we're based in Utah, so it's kind of like a hard place to get to during spring break with a lot of people going out there and stuff. And it's like we started thinking, well, maybe we should do these virtually. And as soon as we started down that path, we're like, no, we got to meet these people. Like we just got to get to know them better. So anyway, I think that's a big part of it. Just getting time with people and getting to know them, and vice versa. We want them to get to know us too. So I think it all comes out when you just spend time together.
Yeah, especially like you said, if you're going to be more, 75, 80 owners, more selective, I agree. It's going to set the pace and the culture and the direction of everything that you guys do from here on out. Once you do find that right operator, this is such a trust-driven, I'd say, business. How does a new franchisee build that trust in a market where maybe nobody's heard of them yet, especially as you're getting out of the gate and the brand's becoming, is it get out in the community? Is it, build those
It is.
relationships, or what do you think that is?
Yeah, it is. I would say that it's really not that difficult for two reasons. One of them is that when a consumer identifies that they have a need for one of these products, most of the time it's the first time they've ever encountered it. And so, even though there may be companies around that have been around longer and all of that, they don't know these companies because they haven't really engaged with them at all. So the first time, and oftentimes we're not actually talking to the end user. It's usually an adult child or a caregiver or spouse or something like that, right? So you got this person, a good example would be like somebody in my age. I'm 55. My parents are both 82. And they don't need this stuff yet, but they probably will soon. And so at some point, a guy like me would start to do a little research. And so I'm not, encountering brands and being like, well, this company's been around for X amount of years and all that. It's just, I'm just doing research. So really, I'm going to gravitate in the direction where I find people that are most willing to help me. If they answer the phone, if they talk to me, if they, are willing to engage. And, a lot of times, like, we'll find that people will call, and that first phone call could be 45 minutes. Like, people have a lot of questions. They're trying to educate themselves. They don't know much about these products and how they work at all, and so they have a lot of questions. And so answering the phone and taking the time on spec, if you will, to talk to a customer for 45 minutes before you even talk about coming to their house for an appointment, that's how you build that kind of trust. And so I think it starts with those fundamentals. I don't feel like we're at any kind of disadvantage with the other people that have maybe been in the market for much longer, because the only disadvantage might be visibility, but that's a fairly short-lived problem. We get our Google business pages up and running. We get some reviews on there, start to work the algorithm a little bit. And once you've gotten a little bit of a critical mass, you've got 20 positive reviews and you're sort of on the map now and all of that, which doesn't take very long, then your visibility problem goes away. So then it's really a matter of, well, what happens when they call? How responsive are we? Do we answer the phone? Did we take the time? Did we treat them with dignity and respect? And, do we have like some of the other structural things? For example, we ask our franchise owners to have a small showroom where they can put a couple of rideable lifts. Like, we build a set of stairs and we put a couple of lifts on there, which is not something a lot of our competitors do. So we give customer the option, hey, would you like to come try one before you buy it? Not many of our competitors offer that. We also carry inventory. So if you have a need, we could be like, hey, if it's a kind of bread and butter product that we can carry in inventory, it might be a normally 2 or 3 week process for them to get their solution in place. We could do it by Thursday, like, hey, we got an open spot in a couple of days, Thursday morning. Would you like us to come, put you on the calendar, that type of thing. So it's just really those basic fundamentals, I think, that win you over in the end.
And this is more of a like personal curiosity question that I have. Is so you think about how important word of mouth can be, given that you're serving this kind of niche, population. Does word of mouth carry a lot more weight than you would say a typical, home services business would, or is it about the same?
I think it matters. Like, especially if you think about, again, when I look at the most successful franchises who have been in this space for a while, they're almost all word of mouth at this point. Like,
Okay.
that's the vast majority of their business. And it's, not, it's coming from past customers, coming from referral partnerships, all of those kinds of things, but it has mostly become a word of mouth type of game. And so when you develop a good reputation and you're competent and responsive, then you'll start to get people will kind of gravitate in your direction because there's usually not a lot of great options out there. So I think word of mouth is really important.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, it's such an emotional decision, whether it's the adult child doing it or not. You want to make sure that, hey, who are we? Is the group that we're working with reliable, legitimate, et cetera? And if you have a friend of a friend or a neighbor that said, hey, that so and so did this for my parent, and
Yeah.
I can imagine that being a talk over a drink or at a golf course, or you're asking or talking to someone about this issue you're experiencing, and they say, well, have you heard of Liftology? Have you heard of this group? It makes
I mean,
sense.
we would even have it happen where, in some of the more densely populated areas, we'd have the van out in front of somebody's
Hmm.
home putting in a lift, and someone would come knock on the van and be like, hey, can you come by my house and when you're done? Like, we've had that happens all the time. So yeah, I think, do a nice job, and then, we will, it's not uncommon where we go into a neighborhood and put in a lift, and the next thing you know, 2 or 3 neighbors have called like, hey, I saw what you did at, my friend Mary's house, and can you come take a look at what I might need here? That kind of thing. So
Don't sleep on the van. In my last company, we did a laundry and dry cleaning delivery business. We had eventually 30, 40 hot
yeah,
pink wrapped trucks on the road, and that was our number one source of customer acquisition. You got these mobile billboards
yeah,
constantly. So anyone that can get the benefit of that, pay the $2,000 to wrap the vehicle, it'll pay
yeah,
itself
it's totally
back
worth it.
in no time.
Yep.
Well, Dave, before we wrap up, I want to ask a few kind of quick hitter questions to close. And the first one is you've now built a second, you're building a second business in the space. Is building Liftology easier the second time, or is it just a different kind of hard?
That's a good question. It's still hard. I'm going to say it's a different kind of hard, probably, because certainly had the opportunity to learn from mistakes along the way, and hopefully learn those lessons well enough not to make those mistakes again. So I feel like there's a lot of value there, but anything worth doing right is still hard, right? It's still difficult. We still have to be disciplined about our processes and the systems we put in place, and all of those kinds of things. I would say it's a different kind of hard, and it's also because we are more precise about where we're going and why. We kind of have a very clear idea of who we want in the system as an owner. We have very clear ideas around the types of support that we can offer that we think will be the most meaningful to those franchise owners. Whereas, the first go at it was a lot of guessing. Like, we kind of didn't know. So we were just sort of figuring things out. And it worked out and it went well, but we had to guess a lot. And so now I'm doing less guessing, but it's still hard to get it right and be precise, to get it right in the right way. And then you've got all kinds of other dynamics at play, right? You've got AI impacting the search engine world and how that will have what will happen there. It's probably a great time to be a new brand in a space like this because it's such a shakeup. And we've already started to see AI mention Liftology, which is shocking to me, but it's happening. And so, you're kind of like, all of that stuff is hard. It's never easy.
It's just
You
a
got to
different
figure it out.
kind.
Yeah.
I like that. The next one I have for you is, what's one decision from the mobility days that changed everything for you guys?
That's a great question. I would say that the biggest fundamental thing that changed over time was the migration to doing more complex products. That became a pretty meaningful differentiator between our locations and kind of the run-of-the-mill competitors, because the run-of-the-mill competitors tended to stick to the simpler, more basic product lines. And so once you got into a little bit more complexity, the competition got a lot thinner. And so developing some, I'd say, just company-wide level expertise around how to execute on the commercial side of our business and on the elevator side of our business has been a big impact, because it does put you in a category of dealer of products that's a lot less common. Like, there's just fewer of them that are competent at those more complex product lines. And so it's been a good business. So I think that probably more things like that, but that's certainly one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I hear I talk to a ton of different operators, different industries, categories, et cetera. And there's these two themes that kind of jump out at me. One is how often people say, you have two levers when you're growing your business. You sell more of the thing you're already selling to more people,
Yeah.
or you raise the price. And a lot of the times, if you raise the price or you sell a more premium, product, It's
Yeah.
scary to a lot of people. Raising prices is scary, but a lot of the time the math ends up being, yeah, you might churn 20% of the customer base, but you're doing 50% more revenue and you're more
Right.
profitable because of it. The underlying cost didn't change.
Yeah.
But your margin. So like I hear that, but then I also hear, something that you kind of just alluded to of like go upstream a little bit, go more, premium, diversify the complexity of the product, go enterprise. If you're talking B2B or software, it'd be like sell to, enterprise customers. And you're saying, hey, let's add more, difficult, products, more complex. And I think it does, it differentiates you and it gives you access to a group, a revenue stream that you might not have had otherwise. Last one for you. My grandmother, bless her, she recently passed away. She was 101, lived on her own until the very last day. And she was very, gung ho on like, I'm living here, I'm dying in my home, this is what I want. And I feel like that's becoming a much more desired thing. I think a lot more people want to age in home, and age in place. Do you feel like that is the future and what you guys are doing, other
Yeah.
technological innovations are going to allow that? Or is this a trend that is happening, or is it here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. Like one of the slides in my presentation in my intro deck is from a survey from, I think it's the National Mortgage News or somebody, but it's like 85 or 90% of baby boomers state they want to stay in their home as long as they can, and they're trying to avoid institutional living for a variety of reasons. One of which is not a small one, is the expense. Like to put somebody in an assisted living facility is easily $100K a year now. And so, if you could put a lift or a ramp in for $6,000 or $8,000 and keep them in their home, which is what they want in the first place, for another year or two, it can be a pretty massive savings compared to, that institutional living kind of price tag. The other factor, which is, another thing that will impact it over the next 10 years or so, is that they can't build them fast enough. So the nursing home industry has already stated, like in a few years, there will be waiting lists and you won't be able to get in anywhere because there will be too much demand and not enough supply. And that problem will reconcile itself 25 years from now, but it's a long 25 years, there'll be not only like the pressure of the cost and the disruption of the life, but there will also be the lack of availability. Like you will go knocking on doors and be like, "Yeah, we're 6 months out. Like get on a list." So for many people, getting into one of these institutional facilities might not even be an option at any price.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Well, Dave, I appreciate you taking the time to come on to share your journey, your story, your take on the industry and what's happening, and really just appreciate you imparting that wisdom to our audience and those exploring for the first time or the 20th time which businesses to look at, which markets to consider. It's a deep, deep, again, gratitude, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. It's been a great partnership. Appreciate you guys.